There's something cruel about how the truth sneaks up on you. Not as a single blow, but as 1,000 small cracks, each one widening until everything shatters. That's how it felt with Ava. She wasn't just my wife. She was the person I'd built my future around. But over the last few months, the foundation of our life together began to crumble in ways I couldn't understand, or maybe didn't want to see. Ava and I had been married for just under a year. We were still in that stage where people called us newlyweds with a smile, where everything we did together felt like a step towards something bigger, building a home, talking about kids, imagining where we'd be in 10 years. But in hindsight, the cracks started appearing long before I noticed them. It began with her turning off her location. Ava and I had always shared our locations, not because of mistrust, but because it was convenient. When she suddenly turned hers off, I asked why. "You turned yours off first," she said, her tone casual. But I hadn't. That moment stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't remove. Then there was her phone. Ava used to hand me her phone without a second thought. But sometime in November, that changed. She started keeping it close, flipping its screen down on the counter, brushing off my curiosity with vague explanations about work messages. One day, she left it on the bed while she stepped into the bathroom. That's when I saw it. Tinder sitting there in plain view. I didn't open the app. Maybe I didn't want to confirm what I already suspected. Instead, I rationalized it. Maybe she had downloaded it as a joke. Maybe it was an old account she forgot to delete. The red flags were there, but I chose to ignore them. By December, things were unraveling faster. Ava started going out more frequently, claiming she needed to blow off steam with friends. On one particular Friday, she told me she had plans and refused my offer to drive her. "Don't worry," she said. "Kara's picking me up." I tried to brush off the unease, but lingered like a bad taste. The next week, she told me she'd be spending the night at a friend's place after another Friday outing. This time, I couldn't hide my frustration. We'd barely spent time together, and I was desperate for some semblance of connection. But she brushed it off, saying she'd be busy with a Christmas party the next day. Christmas came and went. I gave Ava an expensive gift she'd mentioned months earlier. Her gift to me, by contrast, felt rushed and thoughtless, like she'd bought it on her way home. Still, I convinced myself that I was overthinking things. Maybe I was being selfish, expecting too much. The real blow came when Ava started complaining about feeling unwell. She had symptoms she described as pregnancy-like: nausea, fatigue, mood swings. At first, I didn't think much of it. Ava had PCOS, which often cause hormonal imbalances, and we'd always been careful. But something about the timing gnawed at me. During the period she claimed to have conceived, we'd barely been intimate. Twice, maybe 3 times at most. When she finally took a pregnancy test, I was both nervous and confused. To my relief, it came back negative. But then Ava said something that turned my relief into dread. "I'm not pregnant," she admitted, "but if I were, it wouldn't be yours." Her words hit me like a freight train. My heart raced, my chest tightened, and I felt the room tilt beneath me. She confessed everything in a rush, as if saying it quickly would lessen the blow. She'd cheated on me. Twice. She'd met the guy on Tinder, describing him as like you, but more independent, more successful. I sat there, stunned, as she explained that she'd started using Tinder to meet men for money. It wasn't about love, she insisted. It was just a way to help us financially. Financially? The audacity of her justification left me speechless. I'd worked tirelessly to provide for us, sacrificing time and energy to build a life we could be proud of. And this was her solution? She went on to explain that the man she cheated with knew about the pregnancy scare and had offered to cover the cost of an abortion if it came to that. She said this as if it were some kind of consolation prize, as if his willingness to pay absolved her of guilt. "I forgive you," I heard myself say, though the words tasted bitter in my mouth. I wasn't sure if I meant it or if I just wanted the conversation to end. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind. The lies, the Tinder app, the distance between us. I thought about the road trip we'd taken with my parents just weeks earlier, how she'd smiled and laughed like nothing was wrong, how she'd opened gifts on Christmas morning with a look of practiced contentment. It was all a lie, but the worst part? I didn't know what to do next. Divorce felt like a betrayal of the vows I'd taken, but staying felt like a betrayal of myself. I was stuck, drowning in a sea of emotions I couldn't even name. All I knew was that my marriage, the life I thought I'd built with Ava, wasn't what I thought it was, and I wasn't sure it ever had been. I used to think betrayal came in a single crushing moment, a dramatic revelation, like something out of a bad soap opera. But Ava's betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It seeped into my life slowly, like ink spilled into water, spreading and darkening everything in its path. The worst part wasn't just the lies. It was how meticulously she'd hidden them behind a mask of normalcy. A few days after her confession, I decided to give myself a shred of dignity. I'd stop looking for answers. I told myself I didn't need to know every detail of what she had done. But if there's one thing about betrayal, it's that it never leaves you alone. Even when you stop looking, it finds you. It started with a box of Christmas decorations. We'd stored it in the back of the closet, buried under old clothes and spare linens. I was putting things away when the lid came loose, and a few items tumbled out. A garland, some ornaments, and a crumpled envelope with Ava's handwriting. At first, I thought it was a note or a card she'd forgotten to give me. But when I opened it, I realized it wasn't meant for me at all. Inside was a handwritten note addressed to someone named R. The words were affectionate, almost painfully so. Ava wrote about how much she'd needed the time they'd spent together, how she'd felt alive for the first time in years. But the part that twisted the knife? She signed it with her full name, as if to immortalize her betrayal in ink. I confronted her that night, holding the note in my hand like a piece of evidence in a trial. She didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned on the excuse she'd already given me. It wasn't serious. It was just for money. It didn't mean anything. But the note said otherwise. She wasn't just using these men. She was pouring herself into them in ways I didn't think she could anymore. Not for me, at least. "What do you want from me, Max?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I already told you everything." "No," I said quietly, my anger simmering beneath the surface. "You told me what you thought I could handle." Her face froze for a moment before she turned away, retreating to the bathroom, like she always did when things got uncomfortable. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The note told me everything I needed to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. The note kept playing in my head, the phrases twisting into grotesque shapes. I've never felt so alive. I needed this. Who was R? Another Tinder fling? A coworker? A ghost of someone from her past? The possibilities churned in my mind, each one more nauseating than the last. I needed answers. So, against my better judgment, I dug deeper. I started small, emails, texts, phone records. But Ava was clever, or maybe just paranoid. There was no obvious trail to follow, nothing incriminating on the surface. It wasn't until I remembered the second drawer in her vanity, the one she always kept locked, that I found my way in. I broke the lock while she was at work. Inside was a small black journal, its pages filled with neatly written entries. At first, I hesitated. Reading someone's journal felt like crossing a line, even after everything she'd done. But curiosity, or maybe self-preservation, got the better of me. The entries weren't what I expected. They weren't confessions or apologies. They were cold, clinical accounts of her encounters, almost like business transactions. Names, dates, locations. Brief descriptions of what she'd done and what she'd gotten in return. Money, gifts, even promises of future opportunities. It wasn't just one man or even two. It was a pattern, a game she'd been playing long before I caught on. And then at the bottom of one page, I saw it, or the closest thing to perfect. He gets me. I slammed the journal shut, my heart pounding. Perfect. She'd found someone perfect, someone who got her. And here I was, the man she married, left trying to piece together the wreckage of a life I thought we shared. The next day, I couldn't look at her without seeing the pages of that journal, the names scrawled across them like a hit list. She acted normal, too normal. She smiled when she handed me my coffee, kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. But it wasn't the same. It was a performance, and I wasn't buying tickets anymore. I decided to track her. Not with apps or GPS, but the old-fashioned way. That evening, she said she was meeting a friend for dinner, a name I recognized from the journal. I let her leave, waited 15 minutes, and then followed her car. She didn't go to a restaurant. She went to a small art gallery downtown, one I'd never even heard her mention before. From my car, I watched as she met a man outside. He was tall, clean-cut, and carried himself with the kind of confidence that made me sick to my stomach. They didn't kiss or touch, but the familiarity between them was obvious. They walked inside together, laughing at something I couldn't hear. I didn't follow them in. I didn't need to. The way she looked at him, like he was the center of the universe, told me everything I needed to know. When she came home that night, I was already in bed, pretending to sleep. She climbed in beside me, her hair smelling faintly of his cologne, and whispered, "Good night, Max." I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just stared at the ceiling, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a tidal wave. The journal, the gallery, the man. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. I wasn't just losing her. I'd already lost her. The hardest part about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's realizing how deeply you've underestimated someone. I thought I'd seen the full extent of Ava's lies, but the truth had layers I never could have anticipated. If she was hiding a secret life, then I'd been blind to something even darker lurking beneath the surface. After the night at the gallery, I decided it was time for answers, real ones. I couldn't keep following her, hoping to catch a glimpse of the truth. I needed to confront her head-on. But before I could, an unexpected twist threw everything into chaos. The first sign that something was off came in the form of an email. It landed in my inbox one quiet afternoon, marked with no subject line and sent from an unrecognizable address. Inside was a single sentence. "Do you know who your wife really is?" Attached to the email was a series of photos. At first, I thought it was another set of evidence of Ava's infidelity, shots of her with her or some other mystery man. But as I clicked through the images, a pit formed in my stomach. These weren't pictures of Ava on dates. They were surveillance photos. Her at work, her walking into the gallery, her leaving the house. Someone had been following her, and now they were contacting me. I didn't know what to make of it. Was this another one of Ava's lovers? Was this their way of taunting me, rubbing salt in the wound? Or was it something else entirely? My mind raced as I stared at the email, debating whether to respond. Against my better judgment, I typed a single word, "Oh," and hit send. The reply came almost immediately. "Not what you think." I stared at the screen, my frustration mounting. Before I could craft a response, another message popped up. This time, it included a location, a small cafe on the edge of town, and a time, tomorrow, 10 a.m. Whoever this person was, they wanted to meet, and against every rational instinct I had, I decided to go. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread. I scanned the room, unsure who I was looking for, until a man in a dark hoodie waved me over. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with a nervous energy that radiated off him like static. "You're Max," he said as I sat down. It wasn't a question. "And you are?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Call me Eric," he replied, his eyes darting around the room. "Look, I don't have much time. I work with Ava. Well, I did, until things got complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed, my patience already wearing thin. Eric hesitated, then leaned in closer. "Your wife isn't just cheating, man. She's involved in something bigger. The guy you saw at the gallery? He's not just some fling. He's part of it." "Part of what?" I demanded. "Fraud," Eric whispered. "And not the petty kind. We're talking serious money. She's been helping him funnel cash through fake art sales, shell companies, stuff that would make your head spin." For a moment, I thought he was lying. It sounded absurd, like something out of a bad crime novel. But as he explained further, the pieces started to click. The sudden influx of money Ava had mentioned months ago, her late nights, her obsession with secrecy, it all fit. She started small. Eric continued, his voice low, using her position at work to forge invoices, create false accounts. But then she met him. He took things to a whole new level. "She's in deep, Max. And if she goes down, she'll take you with her." My stomach churned as I processed his words. It wasn't just my marriage on the line anymore. Ava had turned her lies into something dangerous, something that could destroy everything. When I got home, Ava was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. She looked up and smiled, her face the picture of innocence. "Hey, you're home early." "Yeah," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Slow day at work." Inside, my mind was racing. Eric's story had left me reeling, but I couldn't confront her yet. Not without proof. If Ava was really involved in something criminal, I needed to be careful. One wrong move, and everything could blow up in my face. That night, I waited until she was asleep before opening her laptop. She had always been meticulous about passwords, but I remembered one she used for her old email account. To my surprise, it worked. What I found made my blood run cold. There were files, dozens of them, detailing transactions, account numbers, and emails between Ava and R. The language was coded, but the intent was clear. This wasn't just an affair. This was a partnership built on deception and greed. One email stood out. "Once this deal is done, I'm out. He doesn't suspect a thing." I didn't need to guess who he was. She was talking about me. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. Ava hadn't just lied to me. She had used me as cover, weaving her schemes into the fabric of our marriage while I stood by, oblivious. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to scream. But instead, I took a deep breath and made a decision. If Ava thought she could outsmart me, she was wrong. This wasn't just about exposing her lies anymore. This was about taking back control. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer. The second was to Eric. "Let's meet again," I said. "I have a plan. If you had told me a year ago that my wife was running an art fraud operation with her lover, I would have laughed in your face. Yet here I was sitting across from Eric in the same dingy cafe, plotting how to take her down. Life has a funny way of turning your wedding vows into a punchline. For better or worse, felt more like a cruel joke at this point. "So, what's the plan?" Eric asked, fidgeting with his coffee cup. He looked nervous, like someone who'd just realized they were an extra in the opening act of a true crime documentary. "We're going to gather every piece of evidence we can," I said, keeping my tone calm, "and then we're going to make sure she can't wriggle out of it." Eric nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "And what happens after? Are you, I don't know, turning her in?" I smiled, the kind of smile that says, "Don't worry, I've thought about this way too much." "Oh, she's not just getting turned in. She's going to experience every consequence, every ounce of humiliation she's worked so hard to avoid." For the first time, Eric looked impressed, or maybe terrified. "You've really thought this through." "Eric," I said, leaning back in my chair, "I've been married for less than a year, and my wife has already cheated, lied, and dragged me into a federal crime. Thinking it through is all I've got left." The next step was delicate. I needed Ava to keep believing that I was clueless. It wasn't hard. She'd underestimated me from the start. I played my role perfectly. Loving husband, slightly insecure, eager to reconnect. I even suggested we have a date night, which she agreed to with a suspicious amount of enthusiasm. Probably guilt. But who was I to ruin her moment? That evening, as she got ready, I watched her with a mix of disgust and fascination. She spent more time perfecting her eyeliner than she'd spent on our marriage. It was almost admirable in a morbid kind of way. She caught me staring and smiled, tilting her head like a curious puppy. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, my voice light. "You look incredible." The irony was lost on her. If she knew I'd spent the afternoon compiling her fraudulent emails into a neat little folder labeled Ava's Greatest Hits, she might not have looked so pleased with herself. Date night was the usual charade. She laughed at my jokes, reached for my hand across the table, and even suggested we plan a weekend getaway. I played along, nodding and smiling like a trained monkey. By the time we got home, she was in such a good mood that she poured herself a glass of wine and suggested we watch a movie. "Sure," I said, scrolling through the options. "How about a crime thriller? You seem to enjoy those." She laughed, oblivious to the venom behind my smile. "You know I like a good twist." "Oh, Ava, I thought. You're about to get the twist of a lifetime." The next day, Eric delivered the goods. He had managed to retrieve a few recordings of Ava's phone calls with R. Apparently, Eric had been working closely with them on some of their transactions and had been smart enough to cover his own ass. One of the recordings was particularly damning. I'm not worried about Max. Ava's voice said, casual and dismissive. He's sweet but naive. He'd never suspect anything. I've got him wrapped around my finger. Hearing her say it out loud was both devastating and darkly hilarious. Sweet, naive Max. The same guy who was now sitting on a mountain of evidence, waiting to watch her empire crumble. But I wasn't ready to go full scorched earth yet. No, Ava deserved something special. A grand reveal. The kind you only see in movies where the hero walks away while everything burns behind him. So, I set the stage. That weekend, Ava told me she had work to do at the gallery. Of course, I knew what that really meant, but I pretended to be supportive. You've been working so hard lately, I said. I'm proud of you. She kissed me on the cheek, oblivious to the fact that I'd planted a tiny recording device in her purse that morning. If she was going to hang herself with her lies, I was going to hand her the rope. That night, she came home late, looking tired but content. Long day? I asked, feigning concern. Exhausting, she replied, pouring herself another glass of wine. But worth it. I nodded, fighting the urge to laugh. I'm glad. Over the next week, I pieced everything together. Emails, transactions, recordings. The picture that emerged was almost impressive. Ava wasn't just a cheat. She was a con artist with a side of narcissism. She wasn't helping her with the schemes. She was the brains behind half of them. The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a transaction scheduled for the following Friday. It was big. Big enough to catch the attention of authorities if handled correctly. I forwarded the details to a contact Eric had suggested, a friend of his who worked in law enforcement. This is it, I told him. This is how it ends. The day came faster than I expected. Ava left the house that morning, completely unaware that her world was about to implode. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I sat at home with a drink in hand, waiting for the inevitable. By noon, the news broke. A high-profile art fraud ring had been exposed. Arrests were made. Names were released. And there, among them, was Ava's. When she called me from the station, I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice frantic and pleading. Max, please. I need you. This isn't what it looks like. I can explain. I played the message twice, savoring every word. Then I deleted it. As I sat back and sipped my drink, I couldn't help but smile. Sweet, naive Max had finally turned the tables. And Ava? Well, she got her twist ending. They say every story has an ending, but watching Ava's unravel felt more like watching a clown car crash into a dumpster fire. It was chaotic, embarrassing, and impossible to look away. If she thought her life had hit rock bottom when she was arrested, she underestimated karma's enthusiasm for creative destruction. Her second call came 2 days later. This time, her voice had a tinge of desperation laced with entitlement. Max, she started, I need you to bail me out. I've explained everything to the police, but they don't understand. This was all a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, right? Because accidentally becoming the mastermind of an art fraud ring could happen to anyone. I fought the urge to laugh. Oh, of course, Ava, I said, my tone syrupy sweet. It's just like that time I misunderstood when you told me you were working late, but actually went on a date with your lover. Easy mistake. Max, I'm serious, she snapped, her voice cracking. They're treating me like a criminal. Funny, I said. That's exactly how they treated Al Capone. History repeats itself, I guess. I hung up before she could respond. By the time Ava was released on bail, courtesy of her equally delusional parents, her reputation was beyond repair. She tried to spin the narrative, of course, claiming she was framed or manipulated. She even hinted that I had set her up, as if her brilliance had blinded me into some Machiavellian revenge plot. I mean, sure, I played my part, but let's not give her too much credit. Her friends dropped her faster than a hot potato. Sasha, her longtime enabler and brunch buddy, posted a cryptic Instagram story. Some people are good at faking art and friendship. #ToxicPeople, followed by a close-up of a mimosa. It was peak petty, and I loved every second of it. Ava's job, naturally, went up in flames. The gallery issued a statement, distancing itself from her with all the sincerity of a politician's apology. The cherry on top? The gallery's owners started hosting fraud-free Fridays. a weekly event featuring discounted drinks and jokes at Ava's expense. They even sold a cocktail called the Ava, a bitter concoction served with a fake receipt. It was art imitating life, and I couldn't have written it better myself. The final blow came when the authorities froze Ava's accounts. Her prized handbags, designer shoes, and carefully curated wardrobe? Gone, auctioned off to cover legal fees and restitution. By the time they were done, all she had left was the black dress she wore to the gallery, the same one she'd been wearing the night I saw her with R. The poetic justice was almost too delicious. A month after the fallout, she showed up at my door. I was half tempted to ignore her, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, there she stood, drenched from the rain and clutching a plastic bag that presumably contained the last remnants of her dignity. "Max," she said, her voice small, "I have nowhere else to go." I leaned against the door frame, fighting the smirk tugging at my lips. "Oh, Ava," I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I wish I could help, but I've recently started focusing on surrounding myself with trustworthy people. You know, like the opposite of you." She blinked, the reality of her situation hitting her like a truck. "Please," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I made mistakes, but I've changed. I don't know who else to turn to." I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. "You could try your buddy R." "Oh, wait, he's probably busy laundering his own excuses." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. "I'm sorry, Ava," I said, my tone devoid of sympathy. "But this is your masterpiece. You painted yourself into this corner, and I'm not handing you a brush." I shut the door and walked away, the sound of the rain drowning out her sobs. These days, I'm doing fine. Better than fine, actually. I've started dating again. Nothing serious, just enough to remind me that not all women come with a hidden Tinder account and a penchant for criminal activity. My job's great, my social life is thriving, and my sanity is blissfully intact. As for Ava, she moved back in with her parents, who, last I heard, were less than thrilled about their new roommate. She's working part-time at a local diner, serving coffee to people who whisper about her as she walks away. Occasionally, I'll hear through the grapevine that she's still trying to clear her name, but her audience has dwindled to zero. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that karma doesn't just knock. It kicks the door in, makes itself at home, and rearranges your furniture. Ava thought she was the artist of her own destiny, but in the end, she was just a fraud. And me? I'm finally free. Watching the chaos she created fade into the rearview mirror. Here's to fresh starts, poetic justice, and never letting anyone like Ava into my life again.